Order. Get my notes ready. Order, please. The subcommittee on supply will come to order. It's now 3:56 p.m. Subcommittee is meeting to continue the estimates for the Office of Addictions and Mental Health as outlined in Resolution E27. So from our last meeting, we had some time remaining in the NDP caucus time for questions on estimates for the minister. So I will now pass it to the the member for Halifax, Citadel, Sable Island, and it's now 3:57.
Okay, great, thank you. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being back. My understanding was that perhaps I'm going to ask some CNS questions and then go back to mental health. Does that fit with the Minister's understanding? Is that good?
Yeah, so
Okay.
I recognize the Honourable Minister for Addictions and Mental Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, that's okay. Member does that. So I'll just await the first question. Thank you.
Wonderful. I recognize the member for Halifax, Citadel, Sable Island.
Thank you. So we've had some conversation about this in the House, and I'm wondering if we could go back over it. So the Get Out There campaign, or Get Back Out There, how was that developed? Was public health involved? What was the cost, and what are the metrics that you're using to evaluate its success?
I recognize the Honourable Minister for Addictions and Mental Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I thank the member for the question. So the total cost was $101,200. So the campaign just ended, so there'll be an analysis that will be completed in the next little bit. So some of the analysis will include metrics, for social media, other sort of platforms. Public health was aware of the campaign. The actual campaign itself would be from the Minister of Economic Development. So specific questions about that would be for that department. Thank you.
I recognize the member for Halifax, Citadel, Sable Island.
I also wanted to touch base on a current campaign that's being run, the Help Wanted campaign for workers, and wondering if there was an equity analysis done of that campaign, how much is budgeted for the campaign, and how impact will be assessed.
I recognize the Honourable Minister for Addictions and Mental Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think what the honourable member was referring to was the Skilled and Healthcare Workers Recruitment campaign. So the primary goal was to attract skilled trades workers and healthcare professionals living both in Canada to relocate to work in Nova Scotia by highlighting opportunities, lifestyle, and other aspects of the province. The total cost was $2.5 million, which is broken down into creative development and production, media agency fees, social media management, and microsite development. So I think in regards to the equity piece, that would be a conversation for the Minister of Labour, Skills and Immigration, where it's if the program is being facilitated through that department. Thank you.
I recognize the member for Halifax, Citadel, Sable Island.
Thank you. I am aware of how CNS works within the Nova Scotia government, and I know that there are standards that are followed. Is there an equity analysis that CNS does with regards to its stock images, its video images, and how it portrays Nova Scotia in the world?
I recognize the Honourable Minister for Addictions and Mental Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I thank the member for the question. Yes, there's been significant conversations with CNS, with diverse groups across the province in the past. There's much more work that needs to be done on this aspect specifically. So there's pretty significant engagement taking place now, and that will be continuing forward as we move along. Thank you.
I recognize the member for Halifax, Citadel, Sable Island.
Thank you. That's great to hear that that work is ongoing. I will say that that description of the work was relatively obtuse. And so I wonder if you can be a little bit more specific. In fact, and I'm aware of some of the work that was done a long time ago in sort of 2009, 2010 around diversity. In fact, I think I might have done some photos for the stock. Anyways, whatever. But my question is about so what communities, what's the goal, what's the timeline? Is it a project that has a project charter in terms of updating our understanding of how to represent Nova Scotia? And yeah, sort of what's the goal here? What do you anticipate creating?
I recognize the Honourable Minister for Addictions and Mental Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank the member for the question. So maybe I'll just, if it's okay with the member, maybe I'll just use an example. I think that may be helpful. So I'll just use the pandemic, I guess, as the most recent, I guess, significant, I think, example to highlight some of the great work done by the department. So I think communications, Nova Scotia worked with, really important partners across the province throughout the pandemic to really make sure that important public health information was really reaching those communities in an equitable fashion. So just a few partners that we've developed really good working relationships with that have been, I think, really noticeable over the course of the last couple of years is the Association of Black Social Workers, the Health Association of African Canadians, the Mi'kmaq Health and Wellness Authority, the Mi'kmaq Friendship Center, and many Muslim community leaders. There was a situation also where CNS staff were part of the COVID-19 working group, which was led by the Association of Black Social Workers and the Health Association of African Canadians. So this group had significant input on COVID-19 communication products using Afrocentric designs, just giving an example. I think the effectiveness of these products were actually recognized by other jurisdictions across the country, because I think actually Ontario did request to use similar designs in their communications as well. And I think something else that's, I think, is noteworthy is these public health guidelines were translated into multiple languages, including Mi'kmaq, Arabic, simplified Chinese, Oromo, Somali, as well as French. So significantly increasing our reach to make sure that Nova Scotians are getting accurate and up-to-date information. Thank you.
I recognize the member for Halifax Citadel, Sable Island.
And that's very helpful to have specific examples. So, I mean, I guess the question is that type of work codified anywhere? So how did the pandemic comms team know to do that kind of work? And how can CNS know how to build on that success going forward?
I recognize the Honourable Minister for Addictions and Mental Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, so I think there's the conversations have to be frequent. They have to be respectful and collaborative. I think over the course of the last couple of years that has been the case. I mean, something I've mentioned to the department is making sure that there's frequent, productive consultation with many of the communities, and also some more that I probably didn't think to mention. So these will be ongoing discussions that make sure we have really collaborative processes in the department. Thank you.
I recognize the member for Halifax Citadel, Sable Island.
There were some recent CNS layoffs announced, and I'm wondering if the minister can talk about how the decision was made to eliminate those positions, and what the plan is going forward with the CNS team to fill those gaps.
I recognize the Honourable Minister for Addictions and Mental Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank the member for the question. Yeah, I think it's a very difficult decision, being the minister responsible for the department. But, one of the difficult, I think, situations when you're in a leadership position is really trying to streamline the effectiveness, for your mandate. And there is significant focus being placed on healthcare, with the current government. There's also some opportunity, I thought, to streamline services. Like I said, there'll be continuous evaluation. If there needs to be an increase, that could be the case. If there needs to be a decrease, we'll keep those continuous conversations going. So I think there was 16 positions that were eliminated. Very difficult decision, like I said. So I think these are just part of being responsible. Thank you.
I recognize the member for Halifax, Citadel, Sable Island.
So had you been asked, or had the minister been asked to reduce the CNS budget by a certain amount, and that's where the 16 came from? Or how did 16 as opposed to any other number of layoffs come to be?
I recognize the Honourable Minister for Addictions, Mental Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the member. So I think when, any minister of a department, you really, are responsible for really looking at, increasing the efficiency, at the highest level when you're there. So I did start looking at senior management first, kind of worked my way down. There was also an expectation, knock on wood, that there should be a decrease in workload given the state that we're in the pandemic. There was also an opportunity to streamline some services through some, say, amalgamation of roles. So I think that's sort of a higher level explanation. Thank you.
I recognize the member for Halifax, Citadel, Sable Island.
And can the minister confirm what the total cost savings were from the 16 layoffs?
I recognize the Honourable Minister for Addictions and Mental Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 1.4 million. Thank you.
I recognize the member for Halifax, Citadel, Sable Island.
And where were these savings allocated? Were they all allocated within CNS?
I recognize the Honourable Minister for Addictions and Mental Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to clarify, I'm not sure, is the member asking if the 1.4 went back to general revenue, or I'm not too sure of the question. It would just be a budget reduction for the department.
I recognize the member for Halifax, Citadel, Sable Island.
Basically I'm wondering what happened to the 1.4 million. So was that retained within the CNS budget? Did it go back to the general revenue fund, or some combination of the two?
I recognize the Honourable Minister for Addictions and Mental Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the member. Yeah, so the budget reduction would just be within the operating costs within the department, and actually wouldn't go back. Well, you wouldn't go back to general revenues either. It would just be a budget reduction. Thank you.
I recognize the member for Halifax, Citadel, Sable Island.
I'm wondering if the minister can comment on any new external contracts that were undertaken to fill the roles and responsibilities of the 16 people who were laid off.
I recognize the Honourable Minister for Addictions and Mental Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The answer is not. Thank you.
I recognize the member for Halifax, Citadel, Sable Island.
So at this point, I'd like to switch back to questions on mental health and addictions. But sort of continuing on the theme, I'm wondering if the minister can provide what amount of the Office of Addictions and Mental Health budget represent contracts with third-party providers, Together for All, for example.
I recognize the Honourable Minister for Addictions and Mental Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I thank the member to the question. Yeah, so the majority of these financial allocations to those third parties mentioned would be in grants, but I will get the department to get specifics for the member opposite. They're just kind of actively looking for it here now. So if we could revisit it shortly, or I could follow up with the member, that'd be great. Thank you.
I recognize the member for Halifax Citadel Sable Island.
Thank you. So still on the question of budget allocation, I know that the minister is aware of the World Health Organization's recommendation that mental health constitute 10% of a health budget. We haven't met that budget here in Nova Scotia. And I'm just wondering, so will the amount or percentage that the government of Nova Scotia spends on mental health and addictions increase further during this fiscal year or next fiscal year?
I recognize the Honourable Minister for Addictions and Mental Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I thank the member for the question. Yeah, I think we noticed I think it was 8.3% increase this year. I think as we work towards some very ambitious and challenging, I think, mandate items, there would be an expectation that spending will increase. I'm a little bit hesitant to give a specific figure today, just due to the stage we're at. But I'm definitely well aware of the 10% from the WHO. I know there's some other groups that actually have a higher figure, actually. So, but I think those there will be some significant investments. I think just in regards to specifics, we'll see where we go in the near future.
I recognize the member for Halifax Citadel Sable Island.
So I understand from the Minister of Health and Wellness that in terms of breakdown of responsibilities, that safe supply is under the purview of this minister, the Minister of Addictions and Mental Health. And I'm wondering if the minister can talk about work currently being done and currently planned towards a safe supply of drugs in Nova Scotia, and what funding is in the budget to support that work.
I recognize the Honourable Minister for Addictions and Mental Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank the member to the question. Yeah, so for I guess the preventative piece, typically public health, I guess, would lead that file. But I mean, that being said, there's a deep, correlation between the preventative and the treatment. Once you have active, addiction issues, so there'll be frequent conversations between myself and Minister Thompson in public health. So there has been a increase in harm reduction services for the 22-23 budget. So it actually increased by 26%. So it's 2.22 million for this upcoming fiscal. So just some example, I guess, of some evidence-based harm reduction services that are kind of, I guess, hopefully changing the landscape of the province, right, for better. You look at some of the several different types of harm reduction programs, including managed alcohol programs. So that looks at preventing, severe alcohol dependence. And typically, it's people experiencing issues with housing or housing instability. There was an increase by $464,000 for needle exchange programs, which offer a variety of very important services to people across the province to save clean supplies, whether that's needles or cookers, and helping people with navigation who use drugs. There is annual funding as well that goes to public health to fund some more community-based guided harm reduction. Overdose prevention sites are very important. I provide equipment and safe and caring space for people to use drugs. And another significant piece of that program is the naloxone program, which provides free naloxone kits via our pharmacies across Nova Scotia. So with anyone at risk who requests one that would be at higher risk for opioid overdose. So there's very important program, especially in the event of an overdose, which is also important for first responders too. I know I've talked to a number of first responders who use these kits to actually reverse the impacts of opioids. So that's kind of an overview of some of the programs.
I recognize the member for Halifax Citadel, Sable Island.
Thank you to the Minister for that update, and definitely I'm a huge fan and proponent of the naloxone program, and perhaps the Minister will remember that I made a member statement regarding that program, and I have a kit in my desk in the legislature if we ever need it, and my kids carry them to the skate parks, carry them to school. Like, I think they're a really important piece. I am wondering, though, just getting back to the issue around safe supply. So the managed alcohol program is one thing, but wondering about other work towards safe supply. And just to further the question a little bit, I'm also wondering if the office is working with the Department of Justice to look at the decriminalization of drugs. The government of BC, I believe anyway, I'm going to forget all the folks, but the government of BC for sure has applied to the federal government for exemption to the criminal code related to drug possession in order to better enable their overdose prevention work and their safe supply work. And I'm wondering if those conversations are happening in Nova Scotia as well.
I recognize the Honourable Minister for Addictions and Mental Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the member for the question. Yeah, I've been following the BC proposal, I guess, since it's been submitted closely. I would say something that we're definitely keeping a close eye on. I've had a number of very productive conversations with Minister Bennett from the federal government as well. But I think from a general standpoint, I think evidence-based harm reduction and safe supply is something that I'd be supportive of. But the broader question for decriminalization, we'll have to can probably get some more information, see how that unfolds through the federal government at this point.
I recognize the member for Halifax Citadel, Sable Island.
Thank you. I just want to, I'm switching gears again in my few remaining minutes. So the day treatment program that used to be located at the Abbey Lane that was moved, I don't know if it was directly moved to make space for the day hospital or what have you, but it's been moved to Dartmouth, although I don't think it's fully restanding again. So I'm just wondering if you can talk a bit about where that program is at. So have there been a change in FTEs for that program from the move from Abbey J Lane to Dartmouth? Has there been a change in the number of clients being served in that move? And based on, I think, sort of more limited program offerings, have the expectations for what that program can achieve changed?
I recognize the Honourable Minister for Addictions and Mental Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank the member for the question. Yeah, so the mental health day treatment program was changed to a new location after the acute day hospital opened. So I believe there was some correspondence that went out last week. So it moved from the Abbey J Lane building at the QE2 to the Marshall Treatment Center, the Nova Scotia Hospital site. My understanding, based on my conversations with staff, is from an operational standpoint, the case load or the patient volume has been the same. And I think there also was a change in the actual name of the program. So I think the name was changed to DART, which stands for Dynamic Attachment Focused Relational Therapy. It is more reflective of the new physical location in Dartmouth. So this program would support adults with complex emotional trauma behaviors. It also has a lot of very valuable programming as well. So they can also access the program through their community mental health teams as well. Thank you.
I recognize the member for Halifax Citadel, Sable Island, with 5 minutes left.
So I just wanted to query a little bit in terms of serving the same amount of clients, because I understand that currently it's being offered via Zoom, and then the intent is to reconvene some in-person services later this year. So I'm just wondering, just to really clarify, that the same number of folks are being served via Zoom at this point, or how's that working? And also just going back to the question around FTEs. So has the total number of FTEs with the program changed?
I recognize the Honourable Minister for Addictions and Mental Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the member. Yes, I think it is via Zoom right now. I think the general layout of the program is intensive 6-week group therapy kind of dynamic. That being said, if there's ever a change in acuity or people request an increased intensity of services, that would always be an option, and they would have an opportunity for an intake there as well. There is, I know, in the upcoming future, they're going to be resuming back to in-person as well. And in regards to the number of FTEs, they are the same. So there's been no reduction in FTEs for that specific service. Thank you.
I recognize the member for Halifax Citadel, Sable Island.
And just, there's 433,000 allocated to a gambling strategy, and I'm just wondering what the strategy will consider and what the timelines are for its completion.
I recognize the Honourable Minister for Addictions and Mental Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank the member for the question. So a very important issue in the province for sure. So yeah, there's so the office works with the Nova Scotia Health Authority, the IWK, and also the Department of Health and Wellness, Public Health, for prevention and treatment of gambling harm. We also oversee the provision of mental health and addiction supports, which are provided through the Nova Scotia Health Authority and the IWK. So these will be services that are intended to reduce the harms that can result from gambling. We also fund the Gambling Support Network, which is a service provided by AMC, the province's telecare.
Order. Time has elapsed for the questions for the NDP caucus. We'll now move on to the Liberal caucus, the official opposition. I recognize the member for Bedford South.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister, for being here and putting up with us for so long. But, got to laugh, good start. But I did want to begin my questioning, and I think all of my questions probably will be around communications, actually. Maybe that's just my bias showing through my background and what I'm interested in, but I do have a few questions on that. So I'd like to start by asking the Minister and the staff, are the social media accounts of politicians, let's say the Premier or ministers, for example, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, are these social media accounts considered partisan channels of communication or not? Thank you.
I recognize the Honourable Minister for Addictions and Mental Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I thank the member for the question. So I think the member is referring specifically to personal, Facebook and Twitter sort of accounts. That wouldn't be anything that's would be under the purview of the department. They would be looked at, I believe, as personal accounts, is my understanding.
I recognize the member for Bedford South.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank the Minister for that response. So, in that vein, I would ask the Minister: is there a policy at Communications Nova Scotia for how graphics or logos or any kind of design or communication product are used by politicians. For example, if CNS were to produce a graphic highlighting some element of the budget, and that graphic or logo was used by the Premier's social media accounts, is that deemed to be a conflict, kind of crossing over into partisan territory, or not?
I recognize the Honourable Minister for Addictions and Mental Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the member. Yeah, so anything produced by the Communications Nova Scotia would have to be nonpartisan for certain. And I mean, that's something that we keep a very close eye on within the department. I'm not really sure the nature of the question in regards to people, to individuals' personal social media. If the member could elaborate, I would try my best to answer. Thank you.
I recognize the member for Bedford South.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank the Minister for that. And I think actually it's an interesting development because, as the Minister knows, as we all know, communications for politicians have changed dramatically in the last 10 or 15 years, and we're not writing letters as much anymore, and we're not sending things in the mail. It's all instantaneous, and so these lines, I think, can be blurred at times. So that's kind of what I'm referring to here. So I guess to be as clear as possible, do CNS staff produce any of the graphics that would be used in the Premier's social media posts? So any of his, he's got this signature and the flag and all of these kind of things. Do CNS staff produce, or are they involved in any way in the production of those materials?
I recognize the Honourable Minister for Addictions and Mental Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the member. So the short of it is no. Just to elaborate a little bit. So the practice is the Premier's social media accounts are not operated by government staff. So the elements used in the Premier's accounts are in the public domain, such as the flag and the shield and the signature and things that the member would have referenced. Thank you.
I recognize the member for Bedford South.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank the Minister for that answer. I'd like to ask the Minister if Communications Nova Scotia has a brand or corporate identity policy. So in a past life working in public relations, companies have brand identities, brand guidelines. These things can be incredibly detailed in terms of color palettes and schemes and all these different things. So does CNS have such a document or guidelines that kind of lay out how the government's identity should look and be presented?
I recognize the Minister of Communications, Nova Scotia.
There you go, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the member for the question. Yeah, so there is a brand guidelines. They would be online within the Communications Nova Scotia website. If anyone wanted to take a look, they really do, as the member mentioned, really get into specifics such as colors, fonts, logos, really kind of the finer points. Thank you.
I recognize the member for Bedford South.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank the minister for that. Can the minister tell me when the last time that document was updated? Thank you.
I recognize the Honourable Minister of Communication, Nova Scotia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the member for the question. So the last update of the branding guidelines would have been done on February 1st of 2017. They're typically done, my understanding, based on the historical context of the department. They're done periodically. There doesn't appear to be a fixed date. With the last one would have been in 2017.
I recognize the member for Bedford South.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank the minister for that response there. I would ask the minister, the budget documents that, of course, were released recently, is the 2022-23 budget and its branding, overall branding, in line with the government's corporate identity policy that we've been talking about? Thank you.
I recognize the Honourable Minister of Communications, Nova Scotia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the member. Yeah, so all of the brand guidelines would have been adhered to in the budget. I'm not sure if there's a specific question that the member has, but yeah.
I recognize the member for Bedford South.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank the minister for that. I think, I know the minister's not in the room, so he wouldn't be able to, well, maybe he can see this. I'm not sure what he can or can't see, but I got a stack of documents here next to me that are past budgets, this year's and then the previous 3 years, 1920, 2021, and 21-22. And they are, the first three are rather bland in terms of covers. You've got kind of generic pictures of downtown Halifax, looks like vineyards, and then some graphic design elements, which, you know, are just basically colors. And then this year's budget is a bit different. It's an outlier, I would say. It's glossy. There's photos, 3 photos on the cover here, and the color scheme is interesting, I think. I've seen it before. It's light blue, dark blue, and yellow, which were very similar, or are the colors, I would say, of the Progressive Conservative Party of Nova Scotia. So I would just ask the minister, is that a coincidence, or how were those colors chosen for the budget documents?
I recognize the Honourable Minister for Communications, Nova Scotia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the member. Yeah, so the colors are also in the flag. I think that's significant to note. And like I said before, my understanding is all the branding guidelines were adhered to. Thank you.
I recognize the member for Bedford South.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the response from the minister there. Yes, blue, great color. I wouldn't dispute that, but I do find the sequence interesting. I would say that. I held up the party platform and the budget document, and it was a striking comparison, I think. So I just wanted to note that because, you know, I think there can be at times, and again, I don't want to impugn motive. I know we can't do that, and I have a lot of respect for CNS staff. I know how hard they work and the great job they do, but I just think it's important that we don't let partisan influences kind of seep in to any of these documents. As far as the minister is aware, on this vein, has the photo of the sitting premier been on a budget document before?
I recognize the Honourable Minister for Communications, Nova Scotia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the member. Yeah, so I think there's a number of people I think on the document that the member's referring to from a historical context. I could probably get the department to check, over the many budgets over the many years in the province to see if there was any what kind of pictures are on the cover. And I would try to follow up with the member. Thank you.
I recognize the member for Bedford South.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank the minister for that. That would appeal to the historian in me, and I know the Ledge Library has quite a few copies of past year's budgets, so that's where I started. I only asked for the last 3 years. Otherwise, I would have had trouble carrying it all over here. But it's an interesting question and not something that I have seen. Not that I've seen every budget document, God knows that, but I just think it's an interesting point. Now, on the overall budget here for Communications Nova Scotia, it's about $6.8 million, give or take. Could the minister tell us what percentage or dollar value, whatever is easier, of that budget is going to outside consultants, so outside consulting communications firms, for example, that might do work for CNS? Thank you.
I recognize the Honourable Minister for Communications, Nova Scotia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the member for the question. Yeah, so in in regards to vendors and sort of third-party consulting, we would choose the vendor through a standardized process, and the department that needed the service would actually pay for it out of their budget. We do have a very small budget within CNS itself for other projects, but typically the actual department responsible would actually pay for that out of their own budget. Thank you.
I recognize the member for Bedford South.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just to clarify that point then, so my understanding is that each department, for example, if Public Works needed a communications firm to do something for them, they would pay for that out of their own budget. Now, if I were looking for a list of firms that have gotten those contracts, are those available through CNS or some other mechanism?
I recognize the Honourable Minister for Communications, Nova Scotia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So yeah, that information would be available through public accounts, which is released in June or July of every year. So it would actually list all the vendors. Thank you.
I recognize the member for Bedford South.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank the minister for that. Look forward to public accounts in June or July, as always. Just wondering, following up on a point the minister made, reference to a question from the member for Halifax Citadel Sable Island around savings, cost savings associated with staff layoffs or reductions. I think it was 1.4 million was the figure the minister cited there. Does that include severance or any other payouts, or like is that a net savings or just kind of a gross based on salary? Thank you.
I recognize the Honourable Minister for Communications, Nova Scotia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So yeah, the 1.4 million that the member mentioned, that I mentioned previously, would be accurate. And this figure does not include severance.
I recognize the member for Bedford South.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, so the number would be some degree less than that, probably somewhat significant, I would think. Now, I believe Department of Public Works is over there in the main chamber. I'm also the critic for them, so I'm going to head on over there and ask about roads and highways and bridges and all that fun stuff. But I did want to, before I leave, thank the minister for his time and his staff as well, both on the mental health and addiction side and on the CNS side. I know it's a lot of work for them as well to sit there, and especially the CNS staff who probably sat there for several hours and didn't get questions. So I'm glad that they got to enter the ring, as it were. And so I will give my time over now to the member for Cumberland North. And I don't want to speak for her, but I believe she's going to move over a bit to the mental health side. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you to the member. And I will now recognize the member for Cumberland North.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to the minister and your department. And we'll focus on mental health and addiction. So I'll start with addictions. And I'm wondering if the minister could share with me what are the plans for addiction detox units throughout Nova Scotia, and in particular the northern zone. We've seen, thankfully, I think the Pictou reopened. We were seeing quite a lot of pressures on the one in Cumberland County, which is located, and my colleague for Cumberland South, it's located in Spring Hill, but we were seeing significant delays for persons who were in need of detox, such as from alcoholism and or other addictive drug substances. And the concern for local healthcare professionals and myself is that when somebody is finally ready to go to detox, sometimes if it's not available, we lose that window of opportunity. So the fact that a lot of people are having to wait up to 7 days before they can get admitted and are suffering at home and often times with suicidal ideation, that it's high risk. So I'm wondering if the minister could share what are the future plans for detox centers around the province and specifically Northern Zone.
Okay.
I recognize the Honourable Minister for Addictions and Mental Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the member. So just, yeah, referring to, I guess we'll maybe start with the withdrawal management services, which I believe was kind of the core of the question. We've had some pretty positive announcements, I think, in the last few months with the recovery support centers in Dartmouth and at the Aberdeen. So I guess from a little bit of a context perspective, there was a significant examination in 2019, really looking at best evidence, especially in regards to withdrawal management services. So I know when I used to work at an inpatient withdrawal management unit, I think even the name in itself was probably quite stigmatizing, right, for people kind of seeking out that care. So now we're kind of really looking at things, as from a recovery support perspective, and very much on the continuum of care across, the lifespan. I think people, especially with addictions, you can need services, ranging from an ICU to an emerge to just some group therapy, and lots of things are, in between on that spectrum. So in regards to future plans, I think the recovery support centers will be probably the most significant aspect to mention. So these will be providing, around the clock inpatient care for people that recover from addictions while remaining at home and in their communities. They're also going to be different than the traditional service modality, in the sense that they're going to have also the opportunity for not only just your in-person intensive assessments for your withdrawal management needs, but also including opportunities to access opioid use disorder treatment, community programs, other supports. In regards to the Northern Zone specifically, there is one planned for later this year in Truro. There will be some also expansions across the province in the next, number of months. That being said, I think there's continuous, evaluations ongoing, and especially as, we can tour the province and get out and about a bit more, as things kind of open up. I think there's a significant need, and I think, oftentimes very effective day programs or recovery support centers can be very effective deterrents of things that can escalate to the point where you need an inpatient admission. So I think that it is notable too that the budget did increase by 55% since last fiscal for these specific services. So between this and what's going on in the opioid use disorder treatment kind of realm, there's been a real I think push to kind of to curb this. That being said, we know that there's much more work to do. Thank you.
I recognize a member for Cumberland North.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister. And it's very exciting to see some of the announcements that the Minister and the Department have made. So congratulations for those. One of the concerns, being from rural Nova Scotia, is that my understanding is they're not 24/7. And if someone in, let's say, Pugwash or Wallace was in need of services, they wouldn't be able to travel back and forth, so they would have to either be an inpatient or stay in a hotel or find accommodations to be near. Can the Minister clarify if that's the case? Because my understanding is right now there's one in Halifax, but I think that's the closest one to Cumberland County.
I recognize the Honourable Minister for Addictions and Mental Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the member. Yeah, it's a fair point. I think the issues, especially facing many parts of rural Nova Scotia with access to not just addictions, but to, psychiatric care. So I think the intention, of the recovery support centers would be to have that the outpatient services modality with obviously for the connectivity to have an admission to an inpatient unit if the condition kind of warrants that. I think the transportation aspect is probably a fair point as well. I mean, it's a real significant issue, especially for a lot of the individuals that utilize these services. So I think what's going to be positive over the next, couple of years and coming months for sure, is there's going to be an increase in accessibility points and zones right across the province. So I think you look at standardization of service and and comprehensive services with the opportunity for referral to appropriate resources. But I think, yeah, the impacts on rural Nova Scotia are significant. I also think there's a pretty significant benefit in some of the community-based, organizations that can really provide very valuable services within the communities. So it's the community-based group piece is something I think has a lot of value. So something I'd be focusing on specifically, because we can also kind of work with them to kind of potentially develop relationships that could make services available to the community that would be more accessible, which I think is something I would be open to. But in regards to intensive, like acute admission for withdrawal, there should never be a situation where someone that needs it shouldn't get admission. That being said, I do see the challenges with the outpatient transportation piece for sure.
I recognize a member for Cumberland North.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister. Yes, I'm sure Cumberland isn't alone with those challenges of transportation and accommodations, given the demographics of and geography, I guess, of Nova Scotia. So specifically, Cumberland County's detox unit in Spring Hill. I'm wondering, and my colleague from Cumberland South may have already had conversations around this, but right now I've had both patients and clinical staff share with me that there's been a shift away from the patient receiving a lot of actual counseling, I guess, or therapy, that when they are admitted to detox, that it tends to be more observation, medical observation. And that when they are discharged, they're feeling that they aren't necessarily being discharged with the tools of how to cope and next steps for dealing with the addiction at home. And I'm not sure if that's due to lack of staffing for therapy and counseling services, or if there's been a shift in the model of care and who's involved in the care team. But I've been hearing that for about 2 to 3 years. It was pre-pandemic that, and I had, confidentially, I had some of the nursing staff come to me with concerns, as well as I had 3 different patients come to me with that concern. So I'm wondering if, and then in a more recent situation, I had someone wait 7 days to be admitted, and friends had to be with this person 24/7 due to the risk of suicide. And, it's pretty stressful for non-medical people to be in those situations. They feel so helpless, and there's a lot of fear around what if they can't provide the support that is sort of medically or clinically needed to somebody who is in that detox/suicidal state. And so I know I'm asking a lot of questions here at once, but in addition to asking the question about the core care team and what it consists of, and the lack of actual counseling and therapy when someone's admitted, can the minister also maybe address the wait time in those critical sort of life-threatening situations? And finally, would there be the ability to increase capacity at All Saints Hospital, maybe increase the size and capacity of the detox unit? I think certainly the hospital itself would have the physical space available, and it would probably send a good message to the community too of the value of the detox team there and the focus on addictions, because there's an overwhelming need in Cumberland County for more addiction services. So that's a lot all at once, but I'll leave that to the minister.
I recognize the Honourable Minister for Addictions and Mental Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the member. Yeah, so I think just try to unpack that a little bit. So there's, I guess, the primary role for inpatient addictions treatment or inpatient withdrawal management is really to have a medically safe, supervised detox, right? So not to say there's not oftentimes a host of other issues that are kind of happening concurrently. So is the primary focus. But I would not like you should be doing much more than just observation if you're working on these units, having worked on them. So that wouldn't be something that comes from the top, I guess you would say for sure. So a lot of these people often live with concurrent disorders with addictions and mental health simultaneously. I think the inpatient occupancy rate for withdrawal management in the northern zone is somewhere around 59%. So I think, so that's interesting, I think, in a sense. But that being said, there needs to be much more done, I think, for people in the non-urgent or high risk probably roles. So yeah, I just have heard about the specific issues at All Saints specifically. So I did commit to coming to the area to speak with clinicians once the sitting concludes, which I do plan on following through with that. So I think I just want to hear what's going on from on the ground type thing, and just maybe just take that back and try to reevaluate. Thank you.
I recognize the member for Cumberland North.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the minister. And certainly the member from Cumberland South, as well as myself, can certainly identify who would be the best people in the community for you to speak with when the minister is able to come to the area. And we've got great people and great team, but they often can't help, I think, in the ways that they want to, because either due to lack of staffing or other deficits. So that would be great. So next question I have is a little more specific. We have several patients in Cumberland that have either historically or are in need of ECT treatment, so electroconvulsive therapy. And it's quite interesting. Probably about 2 years ago, we had somebody on a wait list, and I didn't realize how effective it is for treating some forms of mental illness, specifically depression. Unfortunately, there's a fairly significant wait list and has been for quite a while. And I'm wondering if the minister can speak about ECT treatment, and is there work being done to increase capacity and decrease the wait list for people that are waiting for ECT treatment?
I recognize the Honourable Minister for Addictions and Mental Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank the member to the question. Yes, ECT is a pretty, it's very important. It's quite interesting too from, I think, a research perspective. There's still not really a thorough understanding of why it works. They just kind of know that it does in psychiatry, especially for major depressive disorder. It's typically a last resort, I guess you would say, for treatment options after kind of trying extensive lists of medications or depots and those sorts of things. So we did actually just recently invest $500,000 in repetitive transcranial magnetic stimulation. Actually, one of those was in the northern zone, and the other will be in the eastern zone. So this would be a more I say efficient and less clinically invasive procedure. Typically, when you get ECT in the past, you have to get anesthetic and you'd be in recovery, and there's all sorts of can be at times some short-term memory loss actually post ECT, which is fairly common. So this will be a much improved process as well. I think the wait list mentioned for ECT specifically probably pretty significantly correlated with the number of psychiatrists in the zones because they're the ones that are performing these procedures, right, essentially. So I think if we were to get our FTEs up, which we're actively trying to do with the Office of Healthcare Professional Recruitment, and part of the call schedule for psychiatrists in the province that work at our facilities is actually part of being on the ECT call schedule as well. So I think that with those things kind of factored in, I think hopefully there is a notable increase. But I think the actual wait list itself would be significantly impacted by effective HHR kind of strategic movement.
I recognize the member for Cumberland North.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the minister. Yeah, it's a very, very interesting and definitely seems to be a demand for it. And even though it's not understood why it works, if we're seeing positive effects, it sounds like a good area to invest in. I'm going to speak to the minister now about something a little more specific, and I won't go into a lot of detail or spend a lot of time on this because I did speak to the minister about this when we spoke last week. But I want to just go back to the specific situations that we're experiencing at Cumberland Regional and the experiences that a lot of people with mental illness are experiencing as far as not receiving acute medical care for mental illness. And most of us in healthcare locally attribute it to the fact that historically, over the last decade especially, our emergency room physicians haven't been able to access acute mental health care in Truro easily. So because of the, I guess, intense pressures in our emergency department, a lot of times some would argue that maybe adequate medical assessments are not being done and patients are being discharged and released without adequate medical care. So I'm wondering if the minister would consider having someone from the department work specifically with Cumberland Regional to start evaluating how often people are coming in, whether by ambulance, whether by law enforcement or a family member, asking for a psych assessment, and it's not done. And I'm wondering if there would be a way of us doing an evaluation to get a clearer picture so that then steps could be taken to improve through planning. And I know that the Northern Zone administration through Nova Scotia Health and through the department are aware of the problems, and I think that is one of the reasons that there was a decision made to renovate our emergency department at Cumberland Regional. There's many deficiencies, but one of the real glaring ones is there's no physical space for somebody in mental health distress. So the department has a really hard time handling someone when they are, say, having a psychosis or severe mental illness. So I think the department, I think Nova Scotia Health is aware of the problems and that, you know, we do have plans for renovation of our emergency department, but that is going to probably be 3 or 4 years out before it's finished. So I'm just wondering if the minister would be able to commit or at least discuss with his department of evaluating the lack of access that the residents in the area and families have to mental health, acute mental health care in Cumberland.
I recognize the Honourable Minister for Addictions and Mental Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the member. Yeah, I think the acute mental health, I guess, presentations to the emergency rooms across the province has is a real significant issue. I would say from working in one myself. I think there's very clear and accurate data for people that get triaged through their medical clearance and get seen by crisis, and then oftentimes either get seen or not get seen by psychiatry before determine the level of appropriateness for an admission. I think one of the gaps that I kind of identified a number of months back is that for the people that don't see the ER physician and leave, that's originally presented with psychiatric concerns. I do find that concerning. So it's something the department is actively we're looking into it. I just think it's a good example of a connection point too between the acute care primary healthcare system and the mental health care system, I guess you'd say, from a provincial standpoint. So it's something we are discussing. As far as the capital project in Cumberland, I'm not too sure the specifics to the ER and those sorts of things, but I think from a departmental standpoint, I think it's something that we'll continue to look at for sure. I think the ER and mental health is kind of it's a challenging issue that needs to be looked at for sure.
I recognize the member for Cumberland North.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister. Yes, it might actually be a good idea to make sure, I'm sure there is someone from the mental health team working with the infrastructure and on the capital plan. I know that Brian, is it Benoit or David Benoit? Anyway, there is a plan being made, and for the renovation of the emergency department. It's to make it bigger, but it's also to ensure there's adequate space for things like acute mentally ill patients, where right now there's not. But I'm sure they are getting input from the mental health team, but it might be a good idea just to make sure about that. And just in response to one of the comments by the minister about the crisis team, if the minister will recall, last week one of my questions or comments was around the fact that Cumberland Regional doesn't have a 24/7 mental health crisis team. And right now it's only 8 hours a day, Monday through Friday. And of course that means if there's a holiday, then it's less. And so when the Emerge department do have someone that they want the crisis team to see, there's a lot of times that there's nobody available, including if it's like 3:30 or 4 o'clock on a Tuesday, the response that they will get is that, well, they're done at 4:30 and there's not enough time to do a full proper assessment, so they're not able to go to the emergency department to see the patient. So that is a huge factor, and it is the number one request of our mental health team in Cumberland, is to have 24/7 availability of a mental health crisis team. So I wanted to ask the minister if there's been any work with our neighboring provinces in PEI and or New Brunswick, just collaboration of clinical health services. And of course, that's a big issue in our border community. And we have probably 15 to 20% of our patients in Cumberland are from New Brunswick, and then the same would be going into New Brunswick for services anywhere from primary health care, emergency department, surgery. It kind of covers the gamut. But I would like to make the minister aware of the very significant discrepancy in experiences of patients that do go to Moncton City Hospital for an acute mental illness versus Nova Scotia's system. And I've had a few patients that have gone north instead of south. And of course, they've accessed the mental health services in New Brunswick through an emergency department in New Brunswick. So if they've gone to Sackville Memorial Hospital or Moncton City Emergency Department, they get admitted there to the mental health team. And in each situation that they're reporting to me, they are admitted and they see a psychiatrist each day, and they are discharged once the family and the patient and the healthcare professionals deem them to be safe to go home, and they go home with a plan of care. And that is almost never the experience of people in our area that get admitted. And I don't know if it's because we're in Cumberland, or I don't know if that's the experience of everyone in Nova Scotia, but certainly patients of ours that, maybe have chronic mental illness, that have acute episodes, have very different experience in New Brunswick than Nova Scotia, and definitely would deem the New Brunswick system to be much higher quality of care. So I just wanted to make the minister aware of that, and I'm always advocating for collaboration between our maritime provinces, because sometimes we can learn from one another and help each other by working together. We're a small region, so I just wanted to make that as a comment to the minister. So one question I had was around something that I believe was in the platform during the campaign, but I could be mistaken. But I'm wondering if, my understanding is there is going to be a shift to universal coverage for therapy for patients looking for counseling. And if that is still the plan, I'm wondering if the minister could share what is the plan to create that model, and is there a timeline for it to be put in place for patients? Thank you.
I recognize the Honourable Minister for Addictions and Mental Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the member. Yeah, so there's money allocated in the budget for an extensive quantitative needs-based planning for the universal addictions and mental health care piece specifically. I know since coming into this role, I've had multiple conversations with various mental health care clinicians too across the province. So that continues to ongo. I met with a group this morning. So we're consulting with the range of professionals who will provide mental health services. So we really need to make sure that people are maximizing their scope of practice in order to make the most effective use of our resources. So right now, we're really in the needs-based quantitative planning stage, and in the coming months, there should be some significant progress made in regards to implementation.
I recognize a member for Cumberland North.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the minister. I look forward to seeing that. And if I could just add, there may be some sort of low-hanging fruit that that the department could possibly look at, and that is what local therapists have shared with me, some that are working within sort of the publicly funded system, and some that used to but are now fully privatized. I've always, in my former world of being a businesswoman, I've always rented space to private therapists. So one of the I guess tidbits that they would share with me is that they had a 30% no-show rate, at least in Cumberland Mental Health and Addiction Services. And I was really surprised by that as a businesswoman, because in business, you would never survive if you had a 30% no-show rate. And as a business, you would take steps to lower the no-show rate. And that wasn't something that was, I guess, taken on or identified as part of a strategy that could help reduce the wait list. So in a lot of businesses that have booked appointments, there are call reminders the day before and or email reminders to make sure that patients don't forget their appointments. And I just wanted to share that with the minister, because if you even decreased your wait list, if you even decreased your no-show rate from 30% to half of that, 15%, that would allow a lot more patients to be seen. And the practice in Cumberland was that they would book 4 patients a day in an 8-hour day. And then those other sort of 3 or 4 hours were for documentation of the therapy lessons. But, one thing I had shared as an idea was, well, why don't you just book 5 people a day, knowing that if you have a 30% no-show rate, some days you're going to have all 5 show up, but other days you're only going to have 2 or 3 show up. So it would all even its way out, and it would help to decrease the wait list. Anyway, just an idea. I think this might be my last question, depending on, okay. So this is a topic that I think is probably will hit home with a lot of people, and that is the effects of the pandemic on mental illness. And I'm wondering if the department is looking sort of outside of Nova Scotia, like what other jurisdictions are doing, if anything, either throughout Canada or throughout the world, that may be innovative to help sort of combat some of the either mild or severe mental illness that maybe has come about because of the isolation, because of this pandemic. There was a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety. I know when I was going door to door in August, I was really saddened and surprised by the number of people that came to their door at 3:00 in the afternoon that live alone. They were still in their pajamas, and it wasn't a Sunday. It was, but I could tell that they weren't coming out much. Just worry a lot about people, and it's not just older people and seniors. It's also our university students, our young adults. And I just had a conversation with some yesterday about that in their 20s. And, they don't know what to do. They don't know. They know that they're down and they've lost motivation, gained some weight. And I feel like if there was maybe a plan put in place to try and help address this in a large scale, that maybe it would help some people sort of reset in their life, almost like a reset of creating goals and plans and something to motivate them and get them out of the house and get them moving. So I'm just wondering if the minister would want to comment on that, kind of almost like a post-pandemic mental health plan.
I recognize the Honourable Minister for Addictions and Mental Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the member. So yeah, I guess there's a couple comments here, I guess. So I guess from say health service delivery model standpoint, and there's always significant research kind of, looking at different provinces and countries and, current evidence-based best practices, in regards to that. I think there's a significant value to community-based organizations as we kind of, come out of the pandemic. We've had some pretty significant investments so far in a number of community-based groups across the province who do great work. We know that the pandemic has had, significant impacts on our children, with the impacts of social isolation and not being in school, and the, depression and anxiety and eating disorders to kind of go with that, right up to our, long-term care facilities with very similar issues, just in a different population. So I think there is a lot of worries of, of society, I guess, as general. I think there's also a real importance to being active, using our, outdoors activities, and, keeping active with our families, and, eating healthy food and trying to sleep, and, trying to cut back on the alcoholic beverages, and just small things in everyday life that really make a big impact, over the long term. But there's definitely significant work that.
I recognize the member for Cumberland North with less than a minute to go.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I will just leave that with the minister, but it doesn't sound like there's maybe any sort of coordinated approach, sort of pandemic related, but be great to do something, even with sort of from working with health as health promotion, focusing on health promotion and just helping people to get out of this pandemic and deal with some of the mental illness that's come about. I'll leave that. Thank you to the minister.
Order. Thank you to the member. Before concluding the consideration of estimates for this evening, I invite the minister to offer closing remarks and then read the department's estimates for the resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks to the members for their thoughtful questions. We all know the need to work together to fix problems within our mental health and addiction system. We also know the pressing need. We have to manage a growing demand for services and supports for Nova Scotians who have been hit hard by the pandemic and other difficult events over the last 2 years. This requires collaboration with healthcare workers, dedicated staff across the healthcare system, experienced communicators, as well as the insights of people with lived experience, and of course, with one another. It also takes funding. That is why I was happy to be part of this panel to answer questions that many of my colleagues wanted to see. An important first step in any democratic budget process is to give people the opportunity to ask thoughtful questions, and of course, to answer them as fully and as honestly as possible. Over the last hours, this is exactly what we did. So thank you for participating in this process. Another important part of the budget process, in my opinion, is to thank all the people involved in this work. First, I would like to thank everyone outside this room who helped, all the staff at the Office of Addictions and Mental Health, and all the staff at Communications Nova Scotia for their hard work and willingness to deliver on the demands placed on them through estimates and throughout this House session. Thank you to my deputies, associate deputies, and senior management teams for their preparation of the office and agency's budget submissions, and for their tremendous work throughout this challenging year. Nova Scotia is grateful for your hard work and commitment to public service. To all the members of this committee, over the last several hours, we discussed a range of topics as they pertain to my mandates. For mental health and addictions, we talked about our role in ensuring Nova Scotians understand how to access the care they need, that access to multiple services is streamlined, making the system easier to navigate, that those in need have access to services in the same manner, and that there is consistency and integration of practices across the health zones. All of this cannot be possible without the strong and reliable partnerships we have across provincial and federal government departments, with Nova Scotia Health, the IWK, Digicamic, and all of our community partners. I especially want to take a moment to acknowledge the unwavering dedication of so many on the front lines who have continued to be there and care for Nova Scotians in their time of need. As it pertains to Communications Nova Scotia, my mandate is to work with departments to ensure the priorities and initiatives of government are shared with Nova Scotians in a timely and accessible way. Mr. Chair, the members of the committee, No other time has been more critical for sharing information with Nova Scotians than during the last 2 years. I am grateful and hopeful that the lessons we learned through all of this will help us become better communicators and appreciate and value the role of communications within our government. Last but not least, thank you, Mr. Chair, for leading this committee, and to all committee members for their pointed and important questions during this year's estimates. I continue to invite an ongoing dialogue and input from the members here, along with all MLAs across the province. I'll now read my resolutions. E27, resolved that a sum not exceeding 268,631,000 be granted to the Lieutenant Governor to defray expenses in respect of the Office of Addictions and Mental Health pursuant to the estimate.
Shall Resolution E27 stand? All those in favor say agree. Agree. Those opposed? The resolution stands. It's now 5:37 p.m.
Mr. Chair?
and yes?
I still have the E16 to read as well.
Oh, sorry, my apologies.
This is for Communications Nova Scotia, Resolution E16. Resolved that a sum not exceeding 6.78 million be granted to the Lieutenant Governor to defray expenses in respect of Communications Nova Scotia pursuant to the estimate.
Shall Resolution E16 stand? All those in favor say agree. Agree. Those opposed? The resolution stands. Thank you, Minister. So it is now 5:37 and the House is set to adjourn at 6 p.m. That concludes the subcommittee's consideration of estimates for today. Subcommittee will resume consideration when the House again resolves into a committee of the whole on supply. So I ask you to please return to your seats in the Legislative Chamber. The Committee of the Whole House must rise and report before the House concludes its business for the day. I adjourn today's Subcommittee on Supply.